through the chain.
Yeah. Okay, let's begin. We're on. We'll review the Mishnah on the bottom of 19b outside, and then we'll start with the Gemara at the bottom of 19b. Yutes Amud Beis. Okay, we had a big debate. We pointed out yesterday two theories of why leaving Eretz Yisrael causes some level of tumah. And obviously, this level of tumah is only significant at a point where people were stringent about tumah and tahara. And the two theories, one theory was that sort of there's the land, the actual mud, the ground, or whatever's on top of it. If it's tiled, it doesn't make a difference. The actual mud is considered to have touched a dead body. So that would give you the tumah of a rishon l'tumah. So it means you touch something that touched a dead body is a rishon l'tumah. So it's sort of, there's an imaginary dead body floating around, and every piece of mud touched something that touched a dead body. And the other version of the tumah is it's sort of it's a spiritual tumah because you left Israel, and it affects the ear. It's a tumah of the ear, not a tumah of the ground. We said the difference between the two opinions is if you go visit outside of Israel in a box, whether that box is a vehicle or an airplane or a wagon, whatever it might be, or somebody's actually carrying you in a delivery box, any of those options would be sufficient, and you would protect yourself from tumah. So if the tumah pertains to actually being on the ground, then you'd have to touch the ground. Being in a box would not give you the tumah. But if a tumah is in the ear, obviously the ear penetrates, like we said, even if you're in a pressurized aircraft.
Well, Rabbi,
Yes,
if you fall out of the box, does that mean you better hit the ground running?
Yes. It's too late at that point, but yeah. Okay. So now we had an interesting discussion because there's this level of tumah that's outside of Israel. When a Nazir enters Israel, he has to restart. He has to count again Nazirs. How much? Machlokes, according to Beis Shammai, it's 30 days. According to Beis Hillel, it's the full amount that he accepted. Whether that might be that he accepted 10 units of Naziris, which would be 30 days each, it would be 10 months, or it would be as long as he accepted. So that would be, let's say, if he accepted a Naziris of 7 years, then it would be the full 7 years. And the Gemara ends with a story. There was a queen, Hilni Hamalka, and she accepted a Naziris for 7 years to, in the merit that God protect her son in battle. And God did protect her son. She became a Nazir for 7 years. She came to Jerusalem to bring her sacrifices, and the rabbi said, it's another 7 years. And then at the end of those 7 years, she became Tamei. So it was another 7 years. Turns out she was a Nazir a Nazira for 21 years. And according to Rabbi Yehudah, there's a different version of the story. She was only a Nazira for 14 years. We're going to address Rabbi Yehudah in more detail shortly. Okay. We're in the Gemara now. Katani Reisha B'Shamay Nazir Shlashim Yom Beis Hillel Oimrim Nazir B'Tchila. Beis Shammai says you're a Nazir. It's an additional 30 days worth of Naziris for coming into Israel. According to Beis Hillel, you restart the whole thing again. Okay. Let's say this is the machlokes. The Beis Shammai Savri Eretz Amim Mishum Gusha Gazru. Okay, well let me just change up here. Okay, so we have there's like we said yesterday, there are two theories about what we began today with. Okay, there are two theories of why there's tumah. Number one is called Gusha, the ground, and the other version is the ear. The ground version is associated with the dead body. The ear version is some sort of rabbinical spiritual tumah. The Gemara wants to align these two explanations of the why outside of Eretz Yisrael is tamei to the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And like we said, how do you align them? Whichever way you say is correct, because there's a major debate in the Rishonim. Like we said in the beginning of the Masechta, we will try to prefer Taisus' explanation. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but it's in the opposite way of our Gemara. So let me just read from Taisus here. He'll tell me if what the article does. Hold on. Okay. Beis Shammai Savri, I'm reading from Taisus here, not from the Gemara. Beis Shammai Savri, Mishum Avira Gazru. Beis Shammai says that outside of Eretz Yisrael is a spiritual tumah of the ear. V'chmiru be'eretz ha'amim. Okay, because they were very stringent in the tumah outside of Israel. So it's clear it's rabbinical in nature, and therefore there's a need for less stringency when a Nazir comes to Israel. In other words, if you're stringent in the Tumah outside of Israel, you'll be more lenient on the Nazir. However, Beis Hillel Beis Hillel says it's because of the ground, and because we were lenient in that type of Tumah, we're more stringent in the Tumah of a Nazir. 1 second. Okay. So in other words, Beis Hillel says because the tumah is associated with the ground tumah, gusha, we said, is a gzeira because within the framework of tumas meis. So Beis Hillel says, look, you're going to compare it to tumas meis, then you lose the whole you lose the whole naziris. It says if you became tamei tumas meis, lose the naziris, and you have to do the whole thing again. Beis Shammai says no, it's avira, it's the ear. If it's the ear, we're anyways being very stringent. Everybody understands that tumas avira is obviously derabanan. There is no analog for tumas avira in Torah, in biblical law, and therefore there's no need to be so stringent. Okay, and the Gemara concludes, loy the kula alma mishum avira gozru. In other words, everybody holds we're stringent because of the ear. Ubishamei sabri v'stam naziris kanisna. And Beis Shammai is like we explained before, because we're stringent about Nazir, there's no need to be extra stringent. Because we're stringent about Tumah, there's no need to be extra stringent about Nazir. And Beis Hillel says that no, Sabri ki kanisna b'tchilas nazira, that the knas, the penalty for moving from an impure area to a pure area, is the full naziris. He's more machmer than Beis Shammai. Okay, this is our school go the other way. What is your Gemara? Which way do they go? The other way around. Okay, that's the version of the text of our printed Gemaras. Taisus flips around the whole Gemara. Okay. So that concludes. And again, like we said, if you like the other version, you're welcome to look at the art scroll. They'll explain Taisus. Sorry, they typically go with the Rush. So they'll explain the Rush. Okay. Ma'aseh b'Hilni Amalka. The story of Hilni Amalka, we have a machlokes here if it's 27 years or 14 years. And obviously the question here is, what exactly happened? In other words, what's the debate between Rabbi Yehudah and the Rabbanon? Are they debating whether or not she became tamei? So Rabbi Yehudah says it's 7 plus 7, or is the debate that no, she did become tamei, but she actually went with Beis Shammai's opinion. So it was 14 years. Then she did 30 days. At the end of the 30 days, she became tamei, and therefore she lost all 7 years. So it's 7 years, then 30 days, she becomes tamei. It's another 7 years. So actually, it was 14 years and 30 days. Iboilahu, Bishin Nitmis, Valiba de Beishamai, Idilma Bishaloi Nitmis, Valiba de Beisil. Are we talking about a scenario where she became Tomei according to the opinion of Beishamai? Idilma Bishaloi Nitmis, Valiba de Beisil. In other words, does Rabbi Yehudah say that the story that actually happened was that she became Tomei, but Rabbi Yehudah goes to Beishamai, in which case it was 14 years and 30 days, because she became Tomei on the last day of the 30 days? Or is it that no, Rabbi Yehudah holds that the part of the story where she became tamei is not correct. So in actuality, he holds exactly like Beisel. She came to Israel. She had to do another 7 years. Simple, 14 years. She never became tamei. Toshma. Let's examine the Mishnah closely. Also la'aretz. She goes to Israel. V'hayru Beisel, and Beisel told her shtehei nazira oid sheva shanim acheres. She should be a nazir for an additional 7 years. Okay. If you're telling me that the scenario we're discussing is a scenario where she became tamei, and according to the opinion of Beis Shammai, Rabbi Yehudah says she was only a nazir, but the only word I think is very important. She was a nazir only for 14 years. She should have been more precise and said a nazir for 14 years and 30 days. And therefore, presumably, he goes with the opinion of Beis Hillel. Okay, the next version of the Gemara, I believe, is skipped by Tosfos. The next 4 lines. So we will skip. Yeah, 1 second. Yeah. Okay, yeah, the next three lines is skip. It's not clear what it's doing here in the Gemara. I'll read it. We'll read it, but it should be in a different place. Tanya Nami Hachi, you learned as well at the Brisa, Rabbi Yehudah Aimer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. It's really the explanation of Rabbi Eliezer here, which is a completely different discussion. The Amar Kra Zeis Teras and Nazir, HaTorah Amar Kinitma B'Yem Elois Tenle Teras and Nazir. This would seem to support Bishami's opinion. In other words, Rabbi Yehudah holds like Rabbi Eliezer that says if you become tummy on the last day, you give 30 days, which is the standard Nazir, right? Which is this is the unique category of Rabbi Eliezer. We said typically in terms of destructing the amount of Naziris that you counted, Rabbi Eliezer has this interesting opinion. The last day you only lose 30 days. Now, if Rabbi Yehudah holds like Rabbi Eliezer, it's not clear. Well, in that case, then it doesn't really square with the first Gemara. It's nothing to do with Beishamai or Beisil. It's a third possibility. Okay, anyway, leave it as it may. Taisa skips those few lines. Okay, very interesting discussion here. Mishnah. Misha hayushtei idim me'idasaisa. So this is a sort of a Gemara that pertains. This is much more of a Gemara pertaining to the law, that at least a law that's partially relevant today, and it's not directly Nazir related, and very, very interesting. So Misha hayushtei idim. Somebody has two peers of witnesses, me'idas aisai, that are testifying. Elu me'idin. The first group says Shenozar Shtayim. He accepts two Naziris, meaning to be a Nazir twice. The Elun Me'idim Shenozar Chomesh. He's a 5-time Nazir. Beishamai says Nechlaka ha'edus ve'en kanaziris. Their testimony cannot be matched with each other, and therefore there's no testimony at all. And the guy is not a Nazir. Basil says Yesh b'chlal Chomesh Shtayim Shehei Nazir Shtayim. The guy who says 5 also includes 2. So therefore, you're a minimum Nazir for two rounds of Naziris. Now, what's the obvious question here? What do you ask him? Right? Nazir is an Isser question. It's not a moment question. It's not a financial question. It's a question pertaining to matters of law, of how you behave in relationship to God. So ask him. So obviously the answer is either he forgot, he doesn't know, or he decides not to tell us. We can only force him on what we know. So that sort of resolves it. So whatever, it's the three possibilities Taisus addresses. Okay, so now we'll have to see. What we'll see in the Gemara is well, what exactly did they say? In other words, you're having this debate between Beis Hillel and Beishamai. If one guy said, if the question is, did he use the word 2 or 5? There's a clear contradiction there. 5 doesn't include 2. Is a different version of what he said.
Oh.
Well, we'll address that in the Gemara a little bit.
It talks in terms of the 2 being included in the 5. At least the first 2 years of the 5 could be done.
They do years,
Or
it's 30 days.
The testimony is used as being a separate bit of testimony. Thus, the contradiction in the testimony can be seen as occurring only regarding to the last 3 years of the 5, attested to by the witnesses.
Interesting.
Concerning the first 2, however, there is no contradiction.
Very interesting. I find it interesting they use the word years there. I would think it's 30-day cycles.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they specifically.
Maybe did I just throw the word? No, they do not use the word. They use terms.
Terms. Yeah,
They say
terms is more accurate. So that would be 30-day terms.
Yeah, I must have thrown the word. Yeah, not years.
Okay. So let's see the Gemara. Masnisin deloiking haitano. The Mishnah does not follow this opinion. The Tanya we learn, Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, Omer, Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, had the following observation. So we have this well-known debate between Beishamai and Beis Hillel, Nechlaka edusan or Yesh b'chlal chamesh dayim. Do we say that there's a contradiction here, or do we say that the larger includes the smaller? So at least the smaller is true. So he clarifies that debate. If there's 2 different groups of witnesses, if there are 2 sets of witnesses, so in Torah law, a set of witness testimony is brought by 2 people. There's a single person testimony it's typically not even called testimony, but it exists in a very limited group of areas of law. Okay, so you have two sets of witnesses. Each set is saying one set says 5, one set says 2. In that scenario, everybody agrees that yesh b'chlal chamish tayim, meaning that he would have to keep at least two terms of Nazirus, which obviously contradicts our Mishnah, because our Mishnah is talking about two separate groups of Edom, of witnesses, and the Mishnah says two groups of witnesses. According to Beis Shammai, nechlika edusan. There's a contradiction. We do not use the testimony is unusable. Both groups of testimony, not even for two. So this is a clear contradiction to our Mishnah. Okay, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah. Okay, so what is the debate according to this version? Where you have two witnesses. One witness says echad omer shtayim. He says 2. The echad omer chamesh, and the other witness says 5. Beis Shammai says that they cannot combine to be a pair of witnesses. They could combine. So again, we're talking about where the guy who accepts to become a Nazir does not remember what he did, or if he accepted to become a Nazir in the first place. And one witness says you accepted 2 rounds, the other guy says 5 rounds. He doesn't know, so he doesn't have to listen to anyone. And again, the point also, you have to realize that if one witness came, he wouldn't have to listen to him either. One witness cannot obligate. Just because somebody heard you say that you're becoming a Nazir doesn't mean you're a Nazir. You need 2 witnesses to do that. And in this case, you don't have 2. They can't combine to become one group, because one guy's saying 2, one guy's saying 5. It's two different things. According to Beis Shammai, according to Beis Hill, 5 includes 2, and we could still include you as a combination witness. In other words, as a set of witnesses, 2 people with that testify you accepted a minimum of 2 Naziris, and you'd have to keep two terms of Naziris. Okay. Amar Rav. Rav says, Hakol Maidim b'Maina. Everyone agrees in the situation of Maina, of counting. One second. Okay. This is a very interesting one. So until now, we're talking about 2 and 5. 2 and 5 is interesting because that is clearly contradiction, right? The person, either he said 2 or he said 5. Now we have an interesting combination where the first, we'll soon see exactly how it happened. But let's say instead of the guy saying, I'm accepting 5 Naziris, he said, I'm accepting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Naziris. Or the other guy says he accepted 1, 2 Naziris. He actually counts. So interestingly enough, according to Rav, it's actually a machlokes. I'm sorry, it's not a machlokes. Everybody agrees in the scenario of Maina, there's no Naziris at all. Yes, absolutely. So the Gemara is going to address that. Amr le Rav Chama Rav Chisda. Rav Chama says, Rav Chisda, what exactly was the specifics? My Amr, what are the specifics? Ilema, let's say, perhaps. Now, obviously, it can't be the case that one person, a witness, group of witnesses, number 1 says, he said, I'm accepting Naziris of a first and a second Naziris. And the second group says, a first, a second, a third, a fourth, and a 5. Because in that case, there's clearly an agreement on the first 2. So that would seem to be the opposite. Everyone think in that case that the guy certainly has to accept 2 rounds of Naziris. So what must be the debate? As follows. If it's a scenario where one guy says 5, not 2, and the other guy says 2, not 5, that's a clear contradiction. So that can't be the case of Rav. The first set of witnesses says I'm accepting Naziris number 1 and Naziris number 2. And group number 2 says they ignore 1 and 2. And they say the guy said, I'm accepting a 3rd Naziris, a 4th Naziris, and a 5th Naziris. He didn't start for numbers 1 and 2. So you do have sort of a contradiction there. And that's why Rav says, because one guy says he said the first and the second round, and the other guy says 3rd, 4th, and 5th term, therefore there's a contradiction, and you cannot combine their testimony. So the Gemara disagrees with Rav. The Gemara says that it would seem logical, halamali. In other words, the second group feels there's no need to talk about group 1 and 2. Presumably, the second group isn't excluding the fact that the guy himself said, I'm accepting Naziris, a 1st, a 2nd, a 3rd, a 4th, and a 5th Naziris. They just only refer to the guy saying the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th. Hashli yesh lehem chamir to amarav amarav kilos lo amar. The group that's being stringent, that says 5 rounds, they talk about the stringent rounds. They talk about the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round of Naziris. But they don't bother to mention the lighter version of the 1st and the 2nd. And therefore, it isn't necessarily clear that there's a contradiction here. It could be he didn't actually say just 3, 4, 5. He said actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In which case, to the contrary, it would seem that everybody would agree in that scenario that actually he should be a Nazir for 1, 2. Because they both agree, he said Naziris with 1, 2. So the Gemara basically is not thrilled with the opinion of Rav that if group 1 says he said I'm a Nazir for a 1st and 2nd round, and group 2 says I'm a Nazir for the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round of Naziris, that would be a contradiction. According to Rav, it is, and everybody agrees. However, the Gemara concludes Amid Marava ein hakosha b'mayna. In the scenario of Mayna, there's no hakosha.
They just talk in terms of the West, if there's no, in Babylon. So why do they distinguish that they say in the West or Babylonia?
Okay, interesting. Yeah, okay. No, so what did he say?
Oh, okay, great. It just says a reference to the academies of Eretz Israel.
Yeah, yes, it's interesting.
The
So,
West of Babylonia. It didn't give
so
any other.
So interesting. So okay, so the Taisus actually points out here that indeed Talmud Yerushalmi rules like this. Ein hakosha b'mayna. Okay. However, there's a contradiction within Yerushalmi. Apparently, another place in Yerushalmi it says that as the rabbis the rabbis in Israel apparently said Ein hakosha b'mayna. This is not a contradiction. There's another version of Yerushalmi which says it is a contradiction. So okay. Hadron Lach Mishamar. And that concludes this parak. Next parak. Okay. It's an interesting Gemara here about sort of an idea similar to Hatfasa. If you remember, Hatfasa was saying this like this, and we said one of the crucial components of Hatfasa is that you're trying to prohibit something, right? Saying, this should be like a military base is useless, right? It doesn't, just because a military base is restricted doesn't mean this should become restricted either. You need to use a dover hanoder. A dover hanoder means an item that's prohibited using speech. This would be either another item that somebody prohibited by neder. So, for example, Reuven says, "I'm prohibiting this gemara," and Shimon says, "My cup of coffee should be like Reuven's gemara." That would be an example of a dover hanoder. Another example would be a korban, a sacrifice, which obviously is sanctified verbally. And a third example would be a nazir. If a guy says, "I'm a nazir," Reuven says he's a nazir. And then Shimon sees him and Shimon says, "And me too." Well, Shimon's a nazir too. So this is half the discussion of the Mishnah and the Gemara for tomorrow. And the other discussion is with regard to a husband nullifying the vows of his wife. So like we said in the past, a husband's able to nullify the vows of his wife. However, the question now is, the question is as follows. The husband is also able to validate his wife's neder. And we'll see some situations if the husband does hatfasa using the wife's neder. Is that called a hakama or not? So what happened? We'll see in the Mishnah the specifics, but basically the wife makes a neder. The husband says, "And me too. I'm doing the same neder like you." Then he can't nullify it anymore because that's called a validation. Well, what exactly the specifics we'll get to in the Mishnah, and then we'll get to it later in the Gemara in more detail. Okay. Misha Amar Hareini Nazir. Somebody says, "I'm a Nazir." The Shama Chaver and his friend heard the Amar, and he says, "Va'ani," and I'm also a Nazir. And presumably there was another friend there who also said, "Va'ani," I'm also a Nazir. So we'll have to see here. Here's a question for you to think about. So there's Reuven, Shimon, Levi, right? Reuven says he's a Nazir. Shimon says, "I'm also a Nazir," and Levi says, "I'm also a Nazir." Does Levi mean to do atfasa to Shimon, or does Levi mean to do atfasa to Reuven? Which person? And we'll get to it in the Gemara. Okay. V'amar kulam nazirim. They're all nazirim. Hutter harishan. Let's say Reuven regrets his naziris. So he goes to a rabbi, and the rabbi says, "Okay, you're right. It was done by mistake. We're nullifying the naziris." So it turns out now that there was never a hatfasa, because Reuven retroactively was never a nazir. So you can't be matfis on something that isn't prohibited. Reuven turns out was ever prohibited. So therefore, if that happens, Hutra Rishon, Hutra Kulam, they're all permitted. So Reuven, Shimon, Levi are no longer Nazirim. Hutra Achron, let's say Levi undoes his Naziris. Ha'achron Mutter, Kulan Asurim. Then Levi is permitted, but everybody else is still prohibited. What happens if Shimon undid his Naziris? So it depends. If Levi's Hatfasa was to Shimon, so then Levi would be permitted. If Levi's Hatfasa was to Reuven, it wouldn't make a difference. And that will address in the Gemara. So if you didn't get that, that's fine. Okay. Amar Hareini Nazir. A guy says, I'm a Nazir. V'shama Chaverei v'Amar. His friend hears and says, Pi kipiv, my mouth should be like his mouth. V'sari, my hearer, kisari should be like his hearer. Okay. Harei a Nazir. This person's a Nazir. Now, few interesting points here. First of all, what are the prohibitions of Nazir? 3 prohibitions, right? One is Tumah, wine, yayin, and tegalachas here. So over here, he only addresses 2 of the 3 prohibitions, right? He says, my mouth like his mouth, and my hearer like his hearer. Rav Shimon, if you remember, needs you to accept all 3 versions of Naziris before you're a Nazir. Shimon does not disagree in this scenario. Why not? We'll have to address it tomorrow. Another interesting point here is that he doesn't specifically note the prohibition. We'll have to address that also tomorrow. Maybe he did. In other words, the fact that you say your hearer is like his hearer, what does that mean? Is that sort of a coded reference, or is that a useless reference? What happens if you said my hands are like his hands, or my feet are like his feet? Okay, that's for tomorrow. Harei a Nazir. So the Mishnah says, and the guy says my mouth is like his mouth, my hair is like his hair. He's a Nazir. Hareini Nazir. If a guy says I'm a Nazir, v'shama ishtay v'amra, and she says va'ani. So again, the husband says I'm a Nazir. The wife says, and I'm also a Nazir. So for a shalav v'shalaykaim, he can nullify her Naziris, and obviously he cannot nullify his own Naziris unless he goes to a rabbi, and the rabbi can nullify it. Okay.
I thought it was
Yeah.
retroactive. Her,
1 second. So okay, 1 second. So first thing is, okay, again, let's review the case. The husband says I'm a Nazir. The wife says, and me too.
okay.
So the wife makes an neder, the husband can nullify it.
Oh, okay.
Even
Yeah.
though the framework that she used to accept her neder was actually her husband. Now, if her husband is shayla on the neder, her husband retroactively gets a rabbi to undo his neder. So then indeed, if that happens, then her neder is also invalidated because she did hatfasa. And if he is not a davar hanodar, meaning if he's not a nazir retroactively, she isn't either. Okay, another question we'll have to address this tomorrow as well, which we addressed also yesterday, which is when a husband nullifies a neder of his wife, is it retroactively or not? So if you remember from the Durham, we always presumed in the Durham that a husband nullifying his wife's vow, it's always here onward, not retroactive. The Gemara will deal with it. Okay.
In any case, it's only go on the first day, pretty much.
First day, the first day that he hears about it. Now, if he heard about it immediately, then you're right, first day. And if let's say his wife muffled it quietly or something, then as soon as he understands that she has been drinking. Okay. Okay. Mayfer Shalavish. Okay. Let's say a situation like this happened. Hareini Nazira. She says, I'm a Nazir. V'shama Baal, and the husband here is V'amar, and he says, Va'ani, and I'm also a Nazir. So in that scenario, Eini Yochel Lahafer, you cannot nullify the vow. Why not? So again, the wife is the first one. The wife initiates, right? She says, I'm a Nazir. He does hatfasa for her Naziris. There's 2 versions here. According to one version, the reason why it wouldn't work is because the Torah says that a rabbi can nullify a vow. An individual cannot nullify his own vow. You can't get rid of your own vow, but somebody else can get rid of your vow, a rabbi basically. Okay. Now in this case, if he nullifies his wife's vow, then it turns out that he's nullifying his own vow in effect, because he did hatfasa to her vow. So by nullifying her vow, in effect, Mimela, by nature, his vow is going to be undone. So therefore, he can't undo it. The other explanation we'll see in the Gemara tomorrow. Okay. Okay. Hareini Nazir. He says, I'm a Nazir. Okay. and you should also be a Nazir. Now, obviously, a husband cannot make his wife into a Nazir. So therefore, what it has to be interpreted as a suggestion. I'm a Nazir. Do you also want to be a Nazir? And she says, Va'amr Amen. She says Amen, which basically means she accepts it. Yes, she affirms. Solemnly affirms. 1 second. Shomai Va'amr Va'ani. And your husband goes ahead and says, 1 second. Okay. And again, so husband says, I'm a Nazir and you. And she says, Amen. I affirm. Yes, I should be a Nazir. So, okay, in that case, May for a Shalah, he can nullify her vow. The Shaloi Kayam, but his Naziris is still valid. That's because he made a suggestion to her. She decided to accept the suggestion. And that has nothing to do with him. In other words, by he hasn't validated her vow. Just because he suggested it is not a validation. That's the point of the Mishnah. Okay. Last scenario in the Mishnah. Hareini Nazira. Va'ata. She says, I'm a Nazir, and you should also be a Nazir. Va'amar Amen, and he says, Amen, he validates his own neder. Eina Yachol Lahafer, he cannot validate, he cannot nullify her neder. 1 second. Okay. And there are two reasons here. We'll go with the second reason first, which is that by him accepting Nazirus within the framework of his wife, which is this scenario, right, where he accepted, his wife says, I'm a Nazir, and he basically says, again, his wife says, I'm a Nazir, and he basically says, yes, you're a Nazir, and me too. And me too. So the me too is a validation of her Naziris as well, and therefore he can't nullify it. Okay. 10:50. We'll start the next Gemara. Okay. Yosef Rish Lakish Kamed Rabbi Yehudah Nasir. So Rish Lakish was sitting in front of Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi, and this is Rabbi Yehudah Hanasi, who's generally considered to be the compiler of Mishnayos. Which is kind of interesting that yeah, I wonder. 1 second. How do they translate? Who did see over there?
How do they translate?
Let's say, I wonder if it's different.
Participated in a study session held before Rabbi Yehudah Nazir. He said,
Do they put a footnote there or not?
there's 2 footnotes.
I'm just curious because it wouldn't be much. It wouldn't be much overlap.
He was the son of Rabbi Gamliel III and the grandson of Rabbi Yehudah.
There we go.
Hanasi.
There we go. There we are. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so dealing with it. I was confused about this yesterday because it's hard to. Rish Lakish didn't really live in that era. Okay, so basically, this is the grandson of the author of the Mishnah, who is an Amoira and not a Tana. Okay, so he's a Talmudic sage, not a Mishnah sage. Okay, the Yosef Kamar, Rish Lakish had the following observation: and this is true when the hatfasa happens within a toich k'dei dibur. Toich k'dei dibur is a short amount of time. Generally speaking, let's say practically speaking, it's 3 second rule. So anything that happens within 3 seconds is considered to have occurred simultaneously. So in other words, how do we know that when you said me too, you're referring to him? Maybe you're referring to something else or some other meaningful discussion. So if it happened within 3 seconds in other words, Reuven says, I'm a Nazir. Within 3 seconds, Shimon says me too, which is va'ani. Now, how many times can you say va'ani in 3 seconds? So the Gemara it's not really 3 seconds, it's actually 3 words. We're calling it 3 seconds, but it doesn't. In other words, so the Gemara actually presumes if it's 3 words, you can only say va'ani 3 times. And the idea here is you're saying it sort of simultaneously, and therefore we know what you're referring to. Okay, the kama toich k'dei dibur. How long is toich k'dei dibur? How many words? K'dei she'elos shalom. Like as long as it takes to greet somebody else. The kama k'dei she'elos shalom. And how long is that? K'dei she'omer shalom and talmud l'rav. So that a student can give greetings to his rabbi, which obviously requires a connotation of respect. So it's not just good morning, but it's good morning, Rabbi. It's in Hebrew it would be Shalom Alecha Rebbe. So peace upon you, my rabbi. It's 3 words. You have 3 words here. One second. So Amar Lei, Rebbe responds to him, Tuv leishafkes ravkol tamida. You're giving such a short amount of time. There isn't enough time for people to it's not enough time for people to connect themselves to the first guy's statement. And the opinion of Rabbi Dovid Yehudah, therefore, is that you have an extra word. It's 4 words. That's the length of time of Tractate Nazir. Okay, 54. We'll stop here, and tomorrow we'll just review this again. Tomorrow we'll discuss Tractate Nazir. We'll discuss the nullification of a husband to his wife's vow, and we'll discuss